All right, we're just trying to make sure this is working properly. Um, if you can, if you can let me know. Okay, no, the stream's not working. All right, we might try adding it back in on Facebook. All right, just okay. Looks like it's working now. Okay, cool. All right, so guys, welcome very much to our first Q&A of 2026. I had a bunch of questions submitted through Instagram and Facebook. I thought rather than trying to answer them individually, it'd just be easiest to jump on and start answering your questions here. As you, if you have any questions along the way, please just feel free to pop them in the chat, and I'll review them as we kind of go along. But otherwise, we might just dive straight into the first question, which was, what adjustments would you make for severe patellofemoral arthritis? So for people who don't know what that is, patellofemoral arthritis is it's to do with the degradation of the kneecap or the patella, where it articulates with the long bone of the upper leg. What it's typically associated with is issues to do with high levels of force. So it can be a problem with things like stairs, squatting, or being in a seated position with your knees bent for a long period of time. Rowing's actually not bad for PFA, just because compared to things like running, where there's a lot more impact and it's a lot more of a sudden spike, it's a lot more consistent. A couple of things I would consider is that you really want to make sure you don't get into over compression. So you could adjust your setup, but maybe a little bit more foot stretcher height to make sure that you're not going past 90 degrees with the shins. And the other thing is it isn't probably going to respond terribly well to really high force at low rate. So like rate 20 max pressure type stuff, probably not great if you've got patellofemoral arthritis. I'd just increase the rate a little bit, maybe 22 to 24, with a little bit less pressure. So probably the same split, but at a slightly higher rate and less pressure per stroke. Cool. Next one. After about an hour of steady state at 145 heart rate, my heart rate climbs to 160 at the same split. Any advice? So is that after the first hour it goes up, or is that over the course of an hour it gradually increases? If that's the case, if it's the latter one, where it's gradually increasing over the course of the hour from 145 to 160, so a 15 beat increase, that's a pretty good sign that your pace is not actually UT2, because the reason your heart rate is continuing to go up is because there's an increased demand to be able to clear the excess lactate that's being produced. So if you're rowing a little bit too hard, you're going to be producing more than your than just a equilibrium level of lactate, and so your body has to actually buffer that and clear that, and that's going to cause your heart rate to rise. So you're probably still working primarily aerobically, but you're no longer working exclusively in the UT2 zone. So if you see that continual drift up with the heart rate, it's a good sign that you're probably just a little bit too hard in terms of, or too fast in terms of the split, and be worth bringing it back down. Any advice on getting back to race fitness after a severe ankle injury? Yeah, so if you've had a severe ankle injury, then the first thing is obviously to work with your physio or your sports doctor to make sure that you are okay to resume training in the first instance. And then the next step would be to gradually build up both the robustness, both in terms of volume, but also in terms of strength. So there'd be a lot of the work, the best work to do on it would be in the gym rather than on the rowing machine specifically. And you'd be looking to still build your aerobic capacity through other ways. So depending on the nature of it, swimming with like one of the pull buoys between your feet so that you're not kicking. Stuff like that can be a good way of continuing to do some aerobic training in a way that's not going to be forcing the ankle in and out of flexion. But it depends on the nature of it. I would definitely be working with your physio and your sports doctor to determine a plan. And a lot of the best work is going to be happening in the gym in terms of strength and conditioning around that. I will keep trying to get to any questions in the chat as they come up. Otherwise, I'll keep working through the ones that were submitted. What does the 10 by 3 minute rate 20 train? Is it holding peak power or something else? It's definitely not peak power. So peak power is training that's associated specifically with the anaerobic ATP-PC system, or adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine, which is the system that produces the vast majority of energy in the first 10 seconds of high intensity effort, or of any effort really. 3 minutes at rate 20 is obviously well beyond the scope of peak power. Generally speaking, the 10 by 3 minute R20 as a training session is an anaerobic threshold type of work where you're actually operating at an intensity above AT, but due to the short duration and then the rest period, you see that your lactate levels and your heart rate will kind of go like this, where it rises in order to meet the demands of what you're doing. But then because it's quite short and in the grand scheme of things, still relatively low intensity because of the rating. It's not an all-out sprint for 3 minutes or anything like that. The amount of lactate, you're probably getting a little bit above anaerobic threshold, and then in that minute it buffers, brings it back down, pushes it up again. So it improves the body's ability to buffer the lactate as it's produced, which as a result improves your anaerobic threshold by making you more efficient at holding a pace slightly beyond where it currently is, which works to shift the lactate curve to the right. If you've not seen a lactate curve before, I did a video on it, I think it was last week, worth going and having a look at. What club do you row at in Brisbane? So I don't row in Brisbane. I don't live in Brisbane. I lived there for a long time, Brisbane, Australia. So I was born there. I moved away. I actually grew up in Rockhampton, where the 2032 Olympic course will be. And then I moved back to Brisbane for university. I was there for, I think, 7 years. I actually live in Melbourne, but the club that I rode with, not obviously anymore, was Toowong Rowing Club. So I rode lightweight there, and I also coached there for a while as well. So that's my home club in Brisbane. Question from the chat. Any advice for my first 2K that's tomorrow? If it's your very first 2K, the best advice I can give you is don't be fooled by the first 500 meters. You're probably going to get towards the end of the first 500 meters feeling like you are going to set the world on fire, and it's all a trap. It's not real, it's not true, and it's probably going to end pretty badly. You're much better off being conservative in your first 2K. You'd be better off doing it coming to the end of it and going, damn, I still had a little bit left in me, because that's probably going to give you, for your very first one, a better understanding of where you're at. If you go all out and you blow up by 600 meters, there'll be some people who say that, well, you learn more from failure than from success. That's not the type of failure you learn a terrible lot from, other than not to do that again. So to give you a personal anecdote, the very first 2K that I ever did, I mentioned I grew up in Rockhampton. At that time, it was a full sculling program. We did no ergos. We didn't own any ergos. So the very first 2K that I ever did was putting my name down for the U19 selection. I'd never done a 2K. I'd never done an ergo session at that point. And the very first 2K I did, I went out, I think the first 500 was about 126, which would have broken, if I'd sustained that, would have broken the lightweight world record. You may be shocked to learn I don't hold the lightweight world record. It didn't go well. From there, it was just an absolute disaster. I think I finished up at about a 712 or something like that. But as a comparison from a 126 first 500, you can imagine how much of a drop off that was. It was probably a 30-second drop off to my final 500. The best way to get a good result on your 2K is to be as consistent as possible between your splits. I learned that lesson. I redid it a few weeks later, having had some more practice, and I did a 642. So that was my first real 2K, because the first one I don't really count, other than as a learning experience for everyone. But it was a 30-second difference in a couple of weeks just from pacing it properly. Cool. Okay. My heart rate is typically 5 to 10 points higher on hot and humid days. Should I stick to my usual UT2 heart rate and accept a slower split, or factor in the conditions? Stick to your normal UT2 split. So if you have established what it is based on, sessions that you've done when it has been, more temperate conditions, then you can rely on that pretty well. But I think one of the key things when you're assessing training zones is not to get completely obsessed with one metric. So what I mean by that is not just to focus on heart rate or just to focus on split, but also to focus on both, and also RPE, or rate of perceived effort, which is basically how hard does it feel out of 10. So UT2 should be like a 4 out of 10. Um, if your split is normal and your RPE is normal and it's hot and humid and your heart rate's a little bit higher, I would stick with the RPE and the split. But remember that you need to keep hydrated in those conditions as well. So the more dehydrated you become in those conditions, the more your heart rate is going to increase. So if you're seeing your heart rates continue spiking up and up, it probably means you're not drinking enough water within that session. Yeah. What's the best height for rowing? The best height is probably whatever height you are. Honestly, height is, in my opinion, the most overrated metric. Now, obviously, at the extremes, if you were like, 4'1", then you're probably too short for rowing. But realistically, an average, and like there have been people who would be classed as average sized people who have won Olympic gold, particularly in sculling events. But even people as short as 5'11" and 6 foot who've won gold medals at Olympic level in sweep boats. I can't remember his name, but I'm the bowman of the US men's 8 in 2004 that won gold was, I think, 6 foot exactly. And I know there's been one or two other people of sort of 5'11". Sweep does benefit sculling more as height more because of rotation. Whereas sculling is more linear and then rotation around the pins equally on both sides. But essentially, the things that actually matter are how long you can row, which, yes, it's easier to row long if you naturally have long levers, but you can row long through quality technique, mobility, and then adjustments you make to your boat. So in terms of the best height, whatever height you are, I'm sure is fine. Focus on being able to row longer through those things, mobility, technique, and boat setup. Get really strong, particularly in deep positions, and build a really big engine. Like ultimately, those things matter far more than height. Height is just makes it a little bit easier to get into positions. And you can see that with, for instance, Ollie Zeidler, the fact he can row shorter on the slide, which actually puts him in a more biomechanically efficient position. But he can do that because he's not only very tall, but he's very wide as well with his arm span, which means he can still row, 110-degree arc. Thoughts on training with S3 and racing with S2 blades? If the theory here is that it's going to be sort of train hard, race easy, I don't think that really bears out. The small difference in weight is not going to be adding any kind of appreciable increase in the stimulus you get from training. And if anything, because of the extra weight in the S3, you might even find that it's a little bit easier to get the catch in compared to the S2s being that fraction lighter. So I don't really think there's an appreciable benefit. Now, if you've been doing it and feel like it's been helping, then I don't want to piss on your cornflakes in terms of telling you something that you feel is being beneficial isn't. Because if you feel it has been, then keep doing it. But I wouldn't be expecting it to produce a difference in training stimulus. Any advice on pacing during a 30-minute rate 20? I would start at the average pace that you sustained last time, assuming you've done one somewhat recently. It's not sort of the first one of a new season or anything like that. Start where you achieved previously, and then from 22 minutes to 26 minutes, you can look to step it up, maybe a split point, which is then going to put you just ahead of the average. And then the final 4 minutes, I'd say put the foot down. You've got 80 strokes left at rate 20. It's tough but manageable to just try and empty the tank in that last 4 minutes. How can I increase my power output? So power is a function of two things. It's a function of your ability, the maximum ability to express force, which is to do with strength, and it's also to do with the rate of force production, which is how quickly you can produce that maximum force. So what I would suggest is, depending on sort of where you're at, the two things you can do is, number one, is to get stronger. Get in the weights room, and as safely as it is possible to do, lift heavy. Now, if you're already super strong and you're squatting 180, 200 kilos, then your peak power is still relatively low, then the issue is going to be rate of force production. So you train that through very, very short, like 5 to 10 second maximal efforts with a significant rest period. So the format or protocol that I most commonly use is 7 strokes on, 60 seconds off, done for 20 repetitions. You need to hit at least 90% of your tested peak power as a minimum on each of those. If you miss it for 2 in a row, rest for 5 minutes and then go again. The reason why it's 7 strokes is because that aligns to about 10 seconds at a sort of rate 40, which is really where you should be at that kind of piece. And the reason why if you fall below the 90% for 2 consecutive efforts, you want to rest for 5 minutes is that's about the amount of time it takes your body to fully replenish ATP, the stored ATP in your muscles. So, which is going to allow you to then repeat the effort at a really high intensity. How does training change focusing on coastal rowing and beach sprints? Well, I mean, the coastal rowing and beach sprints are quite different to, I don't know what we're calling traditional or classic rowing, or I don't know what we're settling with, still water rowing. The conditions are quite different. You know, the difference between racing for 2 minutes up and back against and with the tide versus for 6 to 8 minutes, depending on the boat class and age and gender, and maybe even longer than 8 minutes in some cases for some younger people in the single. It's very different demand on the energy systems. So in coastal rowing and beach sprints, you're going to have a much higher requirement for a powerful anaerobic system. So more of your high intensity training is going to need to be focused on that. You have to overcome the significant weight of the boat itself because they're much, much heavier boats. So maximum strength becomes more important. Basically, it shifts the balance from being, a power endurance sport, which rowing is, more towards the power side than the endurance side, in the same way that doing head racing shifts the balance more towards the endurance side compared to the power side. Greetings from China. Greetings to you as well. Why is our coach having me do so much steady state? Well, look, I don't know exactly the environment with your particular coach, but steady state is an incredibly beneficial way of training, as long as it's being done at the correct intensity. Steady state improves your what's called mitochondrial density. So it's depending on your experience with high school biology and so forth. Mitochondria is a part of the cell that is responsible for taking in oxygen and producing energy from it. Massively important in sports performance, but also just in being able to exist as a human being. So having increased density of mitochondria within the cells of the working muscles makes them much more efficient at producing power in a sustainable way. You also get increased capillarization, which is where your body actually grows little blood vessels to the working muscles, brings that oxygen to them, so you get more efficient again, as well as helping with clearing waste products like lactate. So doing a lot of steady state is very, very beneficial for that. Now, the caveat to that is that you can be doing too much of it if the thing that you need to be doing is something else. So if you have a weakness in terms of your power or your anaerobic system or something like that, doing tons and tons of steady state, it's not that it's not going to be benefiting you, it will be, but it may not be addressing the root cause. So I've told this story before. There's an athlete that I work with. He had been trying to break 6 minutes when he finished at college. For 2 years, he'd been stuck at a PR of 6:05. When we started working together, he was at 6:08. We did his initial testing. He was convinced his endurance was the problem because he said, every time I get to the third 500, I just can't maintain the pace. I need to improve my endurance. When we did the testing, and if you're interested in getting that testing, you can, I put a video up about yesterday. You can comment testing and get the framework. But when he did the testing, what the analysis showed was that his aerobic system was very well developed. His anaerobic system was pretty well developed too. Both were actually telling me he should be faster than 6 minutes, but his peak power was telling me he should be about 6:20. We did 2.5 weeks of targeted peak power training and went from a 6:08 when we started to a 6:03, and 5.5 weeks later he was at 5:57. So he went 11 seconds quicker over 8 weeks from someone already operating at a really high level by targeting the thing that made the biggest difference for him. So it wasn't, but he could only do that because he had such a big volume of steady state and so forth behind him, which allowed him to then be able to increase his peak power and have that reflected in his 2K. If he was already more powerful than he was fit, then increasing his peak power wouldn't have helped that at all. It just would have, he probably wouldn't have seen much change in his overall speed, even if he saw an increase in peak power. So it really depends what you actually need. But as a general rule, I'm guessing based on your profile picture, I'd say you're probably a high school student, in which case, steady state is often going to be one of the most effective things for you, just because at that age, you are typically going to be predisposed towards anaerobic, or to be stronger anaerobically than you are aerobically. So it makes sense that might be why you're doing a lot of it. But I still, particularly over winter, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, I would not be just doing steady state. You still need to have some high intensity work in there. Greetings from New York, and greetings to you as well, Noah. How do you believe I should be coming back from the flu? So when you come back from illness, first thing is you want to be majority symptom free before you resume training. And then you want to start with an reduced volume and at low intensity. So I'd be saying UT2 around about 50% of your normal volume for the first 2 days, and building it up over the period of about 6 days back to your normal volume. In terms of the length of a session, then introducing your intensity back in slowly. So you might do a high intensity session, plan a rest day the following day, and see how you pull up. If your symptoms kind of come back after doing the intensity, you need to wait a little bit longer before you reintroduce it. When you get sick as well, people will often, when you come back and you do your first high intensity session, you'll probably be slower than you were. And a lot of people think, oh, I've lost so much fitness from being sick. You haven't. What happens is form, as in your demonstrated performance at any given time, is a reflection of your fitness minus fatigue. And sickness adds to the fatigue. So you might be just as fit as you were, but because of the sickness, you have more fatigue, means that your performance you can put out isn't as good as it otherwise would be. As you shed that fatigue, your performance will then come back up. So whatever you feel like you may have lost in fitness while you're being sick, you probably haven't. The UT2 stuff will continue to benefit you. You might just see an immediate reduction in performance when you first come back, but that will not only reverse itself, but you'll kind of come back from that quite quickly as you shed that fatigue. Thoughts on taking breaks during UT2, e.g. 15K steady state at a slower split versus 3x5K? Okay, so I wouldn't be doing it at different splits, but the reason I do program different splits, I'll say that again. I do program steady state broken up. The reason for that is actually just because there was some really good research that World Rowing did in the late 2000s, early 2010s, where they looked at the most common causes of lower back pain in rowers. And the number one incidence, or the number one correlation with instances of lower back pain, was a previous back injury, which kind of makes sense. If it's been injured before, it's more likely to be injured again. But the second strongest correlation was with continuous bouts on the ergo of greater than 40 minutes or greater. And what they saw was even people who did 90 minutes, if they broke it up into like 3x30, had lower instances of lower back pain compared to people who did 90 minutes straight. So I always break it up. I like 3x20 minutes or 2x30. I find 3x20 is kind of a sweet spot for like concentration and so forth. With just a short, 1 to 3 minute break in between is enough to mitigate that risk of back pain. And it's not enough time to make any appreciable difference in the training benefit that you're going to get from it. Do you think I can get a scholarship in the United States? I weigh 63 kilos and 1.72 meters, and my record of 2K is 654. You could possibly be recruited at that number. You'd need to get that down to be recruited with money or with financial support, most likely. The reality is there's not a ton of scholarship opportunities for male lightweight rowers. There's recruitment opportunities, but there's not a ton of money available in terms of full ride scholarships for lightweight, unless you're basically pulling the numbers that get you recruited as a heavyweight. So I would be focusing on, you've got 9 kilos of wiggle room. I would be trying to get stronger and gain some weight up to about 70 kilos. And with that, I would be trying to get your 2K time down pretty substantially. If you can get down into the 30s, people will start showing an interest. If you can get into the 20s, then you're going to start to get a lot of opportunities. Should you set a very high drag factor for the 7-stroke max power by 20 pieces? Yeah, the Ed McNeely who was the Canadian strength and conditioning coach who came up with this protocol um, when he was preparing the 2008 men's eight that won the Olympic gold. They did 200. I certainly would find that is you're going to produce better numbers at that. It's going to create a better training stimulus. You'll get some people who will panic when they hear 200 drag factor and think that they're going to immediately blow their back out. That's not the case, particularly not with this type of work. And as the research has shown, and also what I've observed from 20 years of coaching and running this type of protocol for about 15 years, is that I've never seen back injuries resulting from this session. If you already have a back injury, then I probably wouldn't be doing this type of work. I probably wouldn't be doing all out maximal work full stop if you currently are managing a back injury. Any advice for dropping my 2K from 648 to 640? Yeah, do the testing, see where your strengths and weaknesses are, and target the thing that is going to make the biggest difference to changing your time. So I don't know what your the rest of your profile looks like, but if you're trying to drop 8 seconds, depending on where the where your bottleneck is, it's entirely possible to do that in the space of even I put a story up today. Actually, one of the athletes I work with, she's taken 8 seconds off in the last 3 weeks. So you can definitely get your time down that sort of margin if you're targeting the right things. So I'd start by doing the testing and go from there. What are some things you can do on an erg a few weeks before a 2K or a 5K test to be able to find your target split? So there's a couple of crude metrics. A 500 meter all out test and then add 12 seconds is a pretty crude but reasonably accurate metric for determining your 2K, unless you are a high performance athlete. If you're a high performance athlete, firstly, you probably already have some fantastic coaches who are giving you all of those metrics already. But if you're high school, club, masters, etc., 500 meters plus 12 for a 2K or plus 6 for a 1K is a pretty good metric as a starting point anyway. For the 5K, if you've done if you completely starting from scratch, then I find that that 80 divide your 30-minute rate 20 watts by 0.87 will give you a pretty good idea of the wattage for the 5K. There's a couple of other general rules like +7 from your 2K. I find most people are a little bit slower than that, probably more like +8. But these are all fairly crude metrics. I do a fairly comprehensive, people I work with, we do the 3 tests that I talk about quite a bit that you can get by commenting testing on my video from yesterday. And then we combine that. We would do a 500 meter max, but we'll often do a series of other sessions as part of training in the lead up. And I look at the results of training, cross-check those sort of 3 different sources, the systems testing, the 500, and the performance in training to get a good idea of testing. We had one of the athletes, she did a 2K the other day. She did 717.5 and her projected was 717.4. So she was pretty bang on with it. I have a 2K tomorrow. Any tips? Focus on pacing, be consistent. Don't fall into the trap in the first 500 of thinking that it's that you're absolutely flying. It should feel easy. I'll say it and expect to get a response in the chat. You should feel like about a 6 or 7 out of 10 at the end of the first 500 meters. And then if you would have maintained that pace, you'd be like in 8.5 after the 1,000, 9 after the third 500, and obviously 10 by the end. But otherwise, yeah, as the other people say, lock in and good luck. Cool. I might jump back to some of the questions that were submitted beforehand. Okay. What sessions are best if you struggle with power? Well, I would say, as I spoke about before, it's in strength or the 20x7. Actually, a lot of these questions have come up again. How would it affect boat speed if I raced in a 75 to 85 kilo boat but weighed 100 kilos? Well, it would mean that the boat would sit lower in the water and have higher drag. Depending on how you've set the riggers, you'd want to put the riggers up higher to make sure you still have enough room to get the oars out cleanly at the finish. because as the boat sits lower, that's then also going to mean that you have less room to tap out. So you'd want to have the gates a little bit higher. Definitely can still row in that. I would recommend trying to get a boat closer to your weight category. But those would be the considerations. You probably find it's a little bit easier to sit up and row, but you want to make sure you've got enough room to get the blades out cleanly and acknowledge that you probably have a little bit more drag. What's a good breakfast for a rower? Anything that you can digest. So a lot of people don't eat before training because they don't like the way food sits in their stomach when they go to training. Having something is going to be better than that, but I would generally recommend things like smoothie, banana, even like honey on toast. If you're about to go out and train, yeah, it's pretty much all sugar, but particularly honey on white bread, but you're about to use it all. So that's totally fine to have something before the session that is light, that you can comfortably have in your stomach. It's better than training fasted. And then have a proper breakfast after it that includes protein, carbohydrates, some healthy fats, etc. Core workout. I mean, the best core workout that you can do is stuff as part of weights. So you might want to do some direct trunk work if your core is particularly weak. But generally speaking, if you can't get into the right positions, then you want to start by doing things where you're building strength in the core. So for things like planks, possibly weighted planks, ab rollouts. Great exercise I really like is a catch hold. So where you put a band around the leg of the ergo, put it over the handle, and then you sit in the catch position, brace, and lift your bum off the seat. Really, really good for building some of that core strength to be able to get into good positions. If you find that you can't hold the position at the finish, it breaks down. Or sorry, if you find as you get later in a race or a session, not the finish of the stroke, as you get later in a race or a session, your core really deteriorates and you can't keep getting into good positions, then you need to do more conditioning. So that would be things like, gradually increasing the volume, but not to where you're just trying to feel the burn, but where maybe you're doing your planks might have gone from 20 seconds to be able to get into the right position up to 30 or 40 seconds. The other thing you can do is to add a little bit of resistance to it. So for instance, in a plank, you might put a weight plate on your back to add a little bit of extra load. That type of stuff. And then if you breaks down as soon as you try and apply full pressure, like you can do it and maintain your core at low intensity, but as soon as you go to full pressure, it falls apart, then strength is the key thing there. So that's that loading and so forth that I was talking about just then, like loading up an exercise. What are your opinions on coastal rowing? Look, I think it's really exciting to watch. I do think it's quite different in terms of what you're looking for. It's different in terms of energy demands, although it still rewards a lot of people who are good at rowing are going to still be good at coastal rowing, because even though it's a bit more power orientated, it is still a power endurance sport. So both elements are still valued. Why are there no triple sculls or singles with a 5, 6, 7? I think because people just don't like the number. And I think as well, it also, when you're building a boat, if you can chuck 4 riggers on it and it's a 4, or you put 4 different riggers on it, or it's a quad, people are more likely to buy it because it has more use cases. So if the boats are available, then people are more likely to use them. If they're more likely to be used and they're more ubiquitous, people are more likely to race against them, and then it's going to be part of the competition. And ultimately, that's what we see is the boat classes are dictated by what there's competition for. But really, that's a rowing historical question. I don't know the true answer, but that's my assumptions. Should a 5 by 1500 meters with 5-minute rest be similar to 5K pace? Yeah, it should be pretty similar to that. It's probably going to be a second slower, I would estimate, depending on the individual. You might be 1 second slower. I would pace it starting out 1 split point slower, and then if you're feeling good, you can increase it, and then the next time I'd adjust your splits accordingly. Should I change foot stretcher position for best results on each test type? No. I would leave it as is. You want to make sure that you set up the foot stretcher in the correct position for you, so that you're getting to the your shins at 90 degrees with your hips in the right position. That would be the main thing, and then I would leave it there for all of the different kinds of tests. All right, we'll jump back to some of the live questions. Should I be lifting heavy for muscles or lift lighter and focus on injury proofing with more reps? U16. Uh, so for doing more lifts lighter isn't going to be injury proofing you. What is going to be injury proofing you is being stronger. So obviously, if you lift more weight than you can do with good form, you are going to increase your injury risk. So I wouldn't be recommending doing that, but I would be recommending that you lift as heavy as you can safely lift, because building more strength in the muscle, building more strength in the joint, in the ligaments, that's actually what's going to injury proof you. So that would be my strong recommendation. I'm 8 feet tall. Is that good for rowing? Yeah, I'd say so. As long as you're, I'm assuming you're joking, but if you're not, then yeah, good for you. And as long as you're strong enough to still be able to move through an arc, because as you get really tall, you're probably not. Oh, it is a joke. There we go. Ben is 6'6" though. Well, again, that's a good height. Is probably, as long as he can still row a long arc, be strong in deep positions, and has a good engine. Ultimately, that's the important thing. Cool. I have seat racing soon. How should I pace it? The thing about seat racing is until you get swapped, you don't know that you're being raced. So the old Mike Teddy recommendation was go as hard as you can on each race and then pray you get switched. Probably stands up pretty well. You just got to focus on doing the best you can on each piece. And when you get switched, you want to try and G up the people around you because you know you're being raced then. You know, and encourage them to do some drills on the way back up to the start line. That's going to help you to match up your power application. So things like 0 to 100. Did a video about some my favorite drills the other day. The mullet exercise, which was number 6, great one to do to get timing of power application in a crew boat as well as in a single. So you could you know, do some things like that. Even stuff like some pauses and things like that to just line up in the recovery a bit better. Any tips on helping someone learn power application? Yeah, well, that exercise I mentioned earlier about the catch holds with the band around the ergo legs and then over the handle, really good one for learning how to get in the right position, brace, and create suspension. So if you're coaching, that's a really good exercise to do to learn how to create that feeling, how to create suspension, how to brace properly, all that type of stuff. So I would I'd recommend that. Another thing that I like to do is to get them in the catch position and just learn how to push the legs down, not trying to row hard, not trying to get the split down, but just to get the movement of pushing the legs down while maintaining the core. So they don't, you know, they don't shoot the slide, they don't open with the legs, they just push the angle, and just do it really lightly, really slowly, and then start to add speed as they have the movement. Is erging with your thumb on the far side of the handle good for any aspect of training? On the far side of the handle, I'm not quite sure what you mean there. I would suggest holding it in a normal grip with the thumb around the handle. I see some people who hold it like over the top. I don't like that. I think it actually, they're doing it to try and be more relaxed, but it actually creates more tension in the forearms, trying to actually make up for the fact that you've lost the mechanical advantage of having the thumb around it. You know, we have opposable thumbs so that we can grab things more easily. It doesn't make sense to me to not utilize that. What's good to do on pre-test day? So the day before, I'm assuming, you know, you could do some light, maybe some UT2. You could practice some starts if you wanted to. So practicing like the first 7 or 8 strokes where you're just trying to get onto your split as efficiently as possible. And then and just so that you're going to do that more efficiently on the day, but you're not going to get any training benefit from anything. So it's purely tactical, feeling confident, make sure you eat and sleep well, that kind of stuff, so that you're physically as well prepared as possible. So I missed the time in the 30-minute test where you open up. Was it the 26? Yeah, the 26-minute mark. That's where I put the foot down. What should I look for in a good catch, like the signs? I mean, if you're rowing, first thing you should feel like is you should feel as though it's a bit heavier at the catch, because that's a sign that you've actually got the blade in at full compression where you're probably a little bit weaker. You should feel as though you're trying to get water on the back of the blade. So you're trying to get water on the back of the blade as it goes in. You can think about trying to splash the person behind you. You should, a really good exercise for getting the power application and timing right is if you drop the blades in, the blade will go under the water and then bob back to the surface. You can try and get the legs on before the blade bobs back to the surface. That's a good way of trying to get that to learn to change direction quickly as the blade goes in. I don't recommend doing that hard. It should still be smooth, but that's a good way of feeling for it. Another thing you can do is the pushback. One of my favorite exercises. Start from probably half slide for most people. Back it up to the catch with the blade squared and buried, and then take the change direction and take the stroke. It's going to give you a ton of feeling of what it's like to load the blade. It's really going to exaggerate that feeling, and then you're looking for that same kind of feeling when you're rowing. If you're a coach, and it looks like you're probably a rower, but if you're a coach, I would be looking for an early square and the blade moving towards the water before they arrive at the catch. I don't know if my 5K time on the erg is good or not. This is a lot of good rows at my school. It's 20:02 at a rate 22 for our testing as a U16. Could you give me some tips to improve it? Yeah, do the testing. Like I said before, put a video up about it yesterday. Comment testing, get the framework, follow the testing, see where your strengths and weaknesses are, and do the training that's targeted to address that particular weakness. It's the best way you can do it. 1 to 2 hard sessions per week. The balance is low intensity, steady state. Make sure that the hard sessions are specific for what you're trying to do. Yeah, and as this person mentioned as well, definitely you should be rating higher than that for a 5K. Should I use beetroot powder? Look, I haven't got any experience with beetroot powder, so I don't have a view about it. Any supplements that I suggest, not necessarily like day before 2K or anything like that. I do recommend creatine for most athletes. For high schoolers, I don't recommend against it, but I don't recommend for it just because there's not a lot of research on its use in minors. There's nothing to suggest that it is in any way unsafe, but because there isn't research on it, it wouldn't be ethical for me to say, yeah, go ahead and do it. So I don't recommend it for minors, but I also don't recommend against it. Curious what your 2K goal should be based off max watts ballpark. I wouldn't base it off max watts, to be completely honest. If everything was in balance, you'd probably find that it should be about 190% of your 2K watts, depending on, or Penelope. So could be, if you're female athlete, probably more like 180% of your 2K watts, but I wouldn't be using that to determine 2K pacing because your aerobic system is going to have a far bigger impact on what your split will be at that point in time. The peak power assessment is to see whether that's something that you need to improve in order to be able to kind of raise your ceiling and improve overall. I wouldn't use it to determine your 2K target pace. How to transfer the weight strength to what's on the erg. You can do things like the peak power training. Also, really low rate, like 16 to 20 full power work can help with developing the coordination and the neuromuscular connection to be able to actually transfer that strength to the erg. But that's the type of stuff that I'd be doing around it. Pre-workout before a 2K. I've never seen it be particularly effective. There is research shows things like caffeine, bicarb, all have a positive impact on performance in time trial performance. I would never use something you've not used before. I put a thing up the other day sharing a story. There's a guy that I rode with. He took bicarb before a 6K erg for the first time. He took too high a dose and he shat himself about 4K into it. So that's probably colored my perspectives on it a little bit, but I would never do something on race day that you've not done in training previously. Okay, back to some of the questions from before. Opinion on creatine, as I just said, I think it's great for rowers. I don't not recommend it for minors, but I also don't recommend it for minors just because the absence of research on that particular age group just means it wouldn't be ethical for me to recommend it. Which interval is best for improving a 2K? Look, ultimately, there's no such thing as like a magic number with intervals for a 2K. You can do any kind of weird and wacky thing you want as long as it's done with the right intent for the right purpose. You know what adaptation you're expecting to get. Some people are going to get really faster doing a lot faster doing like 2 by 20 minutes. You know, in some cases, that's going to make people a lot faster on the 2K. Other people need to be doing 20 by 7 strokes at, absolute max with a minute rest. Generally speaking, probably like the best all-rounder is still the most popular one is the 8 by 500. I like doing it with 3 minutes rest rather than 1 to 2 that I see other people doing. I find the extra rest means that you can actually hit it hard enough to get a VO2 max adaptation across the whole session, rather than getting 5 or 6 in, the intensity drops off because you can't hold it, and then you don't end up getting the stimulus in the last 2 or 3 reps, but it still really hurts. So I find 8x500 3 minutes rest is probably my favorite. Only have time for 2 workouts per week in winter. What workouts would you do for a 16-year-old? Look, if you're 16 and you're telling me you've only got time for 2 workouts per week, I just don't believe you. The reality is you could do more than 2. If you're only doing 2 workouts per week on the ergo, that's a different thing. If you can go for a run, if you can do body weight stuff, you can do, but like there's all sorts of other things you can do beyond 2 workouts a week, especially at 16 years old. But if you're talking about 2 erg sessions per week in winter, if you're doing nothing else, then I would probably do 1 long steady state and 1 probably anaerobic threshold. Or actually, you know what? I'd probably make the second one just high intensity interval training, like 8x500s. I just, yeah. If you're doing other stuff around it, like running or biking or body weight, so that's going to change the demands. And maybe you're better off just doing the 2 longest steady state sessions you can. If you're doing other stuff around it that is, maybe taxing your anaerobic system, maybe you're playing, I don't know, might be playing another sport in the winter. You might be doing bodyweight circuits where you're getting a pretty high anaerobic load, all that kind of stuff. I've still got heaps of questions to get through. I'm just conscious of been going for 51 minutes. We'll probably go for another 10 minutes, and then I'm just going to have to call it. We'll get through as many as we can. Views on tapering before major regattas for younger athletes, U19 and below. Same question for Masters. If it's your major regatta is in your most important event, then for both cases, I would be looking at least a 7-day taper to be able to maximize your performance in that. If it's not your most important event, let's say it's a secondary, it's your second most important event and it's 12 weeks out or 8 weeks out from your most important, then I would probably have like a 3-day taper for U19, maybe 7 days for Masters. If it's just, like I'll use the example here in Australia, we have the New South Wales State Championships in sort of the middle of February, and then the Australian Championships at the end of March. So it's about 6 weeks. Excuse me. Most people, if you try and taper too hard for New South Wales States, you won't back it up for nationals. So I would suggest maybe like a 3 to 5 day taper for New South Wales States, given it's a really important event for a lot of people. And then kind of the 7-day taper. If you've tapered within 6 weeks, you actually don't need to do a full taper for the next event. But tapering still a thing. If you're talking about a school rowing season where you're talking about regattas each week or every other week for 2 or 3 months leading up to the main event, I wouldn't taper for anything other than the main event. And same deal for Masters. If you're racing every other weekend in the summer, then I would just taper for your main event. 7-stroke test should be done at full range of stroke, half stroke, the watts increase. I would try and do it full slide, full rate, full power. That's how I'd recommend it. Do you have maybe 3 tips for having a good finish while sweeping other than the basics? Make sure you draw through with the outside elbow. A lot of people try and draw the handle to the body, and as a result, they end up drawing down into their lap. Pull the elbow through past the body at the finish. It's going to give you a more powerful finish. Also make it easier to take the blade out. Other things, don't try and add, in saying that, don't feel like you're trying to add too much speed into the finish. If you end up pulling more than you're trying to add more speed than your arms can actually provide, then the natural instinct is going to be for the blade to come out of the water and reduce the amount of resistance it's pushing against, which is then going to mean that you're going to feel the handle accelerate, but you're not going to feel it. You're not actually going to be accelerating the hull. Otherwise, make just the basic. The basics are the basics for a reason. Make sure you're stepping out with the outside hand, feather with the inside hand. Try and show the face of the blade, like the front face of the blade before you turn it. Doesn't mean you have to get all the way out, because if you've created that pocket of air, you've actually got a bit of space to kind of high jump out of. But yeah, is it better to be in a lower boat at a better club than a higher boat at a worse club? Generally speaking, I would say a better club, because you're more likely to be around people who are going to help you to improve. But if being in a worse boat means you get less coaching, less support, less opportunities, less access, then you're going to be better off being in a higher boat at a worse club because you're going to get greater opportunity to actually improve. I would focus on where is the place you're going to get the most opportunity to improve and get faster rather than better club, worse club. What is a good ergo session to train before the season resumes? Get on and do some UT2. 3 by 20 minutes. If you're not ready for that much volume, 2 by 20 minutes, build up to 3 by 20. It's a good way to be able to hit the ground running. Do you have any advice for a female U19 rower who works out 3 hours, 6 times a week, meal plan wise? I'm not sure if I'm eating too little or too much. Inside our coaching program, we actually have a sports dietitian who works with our athletes and can help with that sort of stuff. It's not really my areas of expertise, but what I generally recommend, 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Roughly, that's going to work out to be about 1 gram per pound if you're using imperial units. But roughly 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, about 50% of your total carbohydrates or calories coming from carbohydrate, and then the balance coming from fats. That would be my kind of broad strokes thing to look for, but everyone's going to be a little bit different. All right, last couple of questions. I'm postmenopausal. Should I still be doing weights and peak power training, or is it dangerous? No, it's what is dangerous in terms of getting injured is not being strong in the muscles and joints. So it doesn't mean you should do more weight than you can handle. And maybe initially you would be actually better off utilizing some machine weights where you can build more strength in the muscle and around the joints, particularly think about things like the leg press and stuff like that, before moving to exercises that are less stable. And then when you introduce if you're using free weights, I would focus on more stable exercises initially, so you can build more strength, greater stimulus on the muscle, to be able to strengthen around the joints and around the muscle, which is going to help prevent injury. Peak power training, one of the most important types of training that postmenopausal women can do. What I typically see with the postmenopausal women I work with is that their peak power tends to be their weakest system. And with targeted training, that can be reversed. That can absolutely be reversed. So we often see a 10%, sometimes even higher, improvement in peak power in the first kind of 6 weeks, working with people who are postmenopausal, and it pulls up all their other scores as well when they do it. So definitely something you should still be doing. What are your thoughts on voice notes? Hate them. I think it puts all the onus on the listener rather than on the person sending it. So it's a bit of a power play. If you send me a voice note, I'm not going to listen to it, just so you know. I can only do 2 to 3 rowing sessions for a 1K competition. Suggestions. If you're doing 3 sessions a week, I would say do 2 high intensity sessions focused on your bottleneck and 1 steady state. You could do that for 3 weeks, and then in the 4th week, you can do a deload where you just do low intensity. How do you rate faster? Okay, a couple of things. Make sure that you use the legs first, because that's going to give you more total force towards the end of the stroke, so you can keep accelerating. Make sure you finish off each stroke, even though that can sound a little bit counterintuitive. Finishing off the stroke is going to give more speed to the boat at the finish, which means you're going to be able to change direction faster and move back up to the catch. If you're on the ergo, you can just think about just throwing the hands away. Just really get them out there. You're not in the boat. It's not going to upset it. If you're on the ergo, you just need to get faster and move faster to get out there. Any thoughts on ratio, i.e. slow control recovery from exit to catch versus almost at the catch, pulling the boat towards you with the feet to catch? I think you're sort of referring to kind of the pause. I personally am most like, I suppose, what is called the pause. I don't think it actually is. It's a pause horizontally as the hands tap down and then change direction. I just see it as being a measured finish. I don't even think of it as the gather. Probably less extreme than like the Aussies in the 2021. More akin to what you saw from like Drew Ginn and Duncan Free back in 2008. I think that was a really beautiful example of it. And then I also saw it as really the slide speed was a continuous movement. Once the knees broke, it was one smooth movement into the front. That's probably the rhythm that I like to see and coach the most. But you can go fast with lots of different rhythms, whatever feels most natural for you, as long as it follows the basics. You don't rush into the catch and miss it, that you still take the blade out cleanly, that you still have a clear organization of movements in the recovery. That is the most important things when it comes to that sort of stuff. Best club to row in Brisbane. What clubs have you rowed at? I think you must not have been on the call earlier. I reckon you're the person who asked me this through the story. I rode at Toowong. That's, in my opinion, the best club. I was a Toowong Rowing Club lightweight, and then coach. So that's still my preferred club. Although they're all great clubs, you know, UQBC, Commercial, etc. They're all good clubs, but Toowong, I think, in my opinion, is the best. All right, last two questions. Hi Sam, how do I move the boat? I've got good ergs and try to transfer that to the water. Well, the best way to do it is get in the boat and practice training there. The most common reason people can't transfer speed from the erg to the boat is that they row too short on the water, and they hurt the boat too much at the finish and out of the recovery. So I would focus on a lot of long, low intensity rowing, where your focus is on accelerating from an exaggerated light catch through to a firm finish, so that you can practice connecting smoothly and rowing a long stroke in the water. But I would also be suggesting that a couple of, like, once or twice a week, full power rate 20 on the water, I find, is a really good way of being able to actually build connection in terms of being able to transfer speed to the water. A couple of people asked about the bicarb. Again, I'll just answer that one. Answered it earlier, but with bicarb, definitely proven to be effective. Don't introduce something for racing or testing you've never done in training. Experiment with it in training. Make sure your dosage is right before you put yourself in that environment. I shared the story of someone I rode with who took too high a dose before a 6K erg and shat himself up about 4K. And so that probably has colored my view around it a little bit. Okay, last one. How many times before rowing competition ergo should you stop training? Or how much time should you stop training before major competition? I would just say sort of the day before, even depending on how fit you are, how much work you've done up to that point. Even doing a light, low intensity UT2 erg can be perfectly fine on the day before, or some practice starts. But you shouldn't expect a training benefit. It's just a tactical benefit. All right, guys, thank you very much. I know there's still a ton of questions I didn't get to across YouTube and Facebook, and some of the ones that people had submitted in advance. But hopefully we got through a lot of questions. If you have others, I'll aim to do another one in a couple of weeks. So feel free to submit questions in advance for that. We'll try and get to them then. But thanks very much. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. And yeah, if you can't be good, be careful.